On May 26, 1927, an earthquake fractured the global economy. The unthinkable, the absolute impossible scenario that no financial analyst dared to predict actually happened. The deafening, mechanical roar of the largest assembly line on the planet, a machine that birthed a new car every 10 seconds, abruptly went silent. Henry Ford, the most powerful industrialist to ever walk the earth, the uncrowned king of America, raised the white flag. Through clenched teeth, he ordered the gates locked, laid off tens of thousands of bewildered workers, and completely halted production of the machine that defined the 20th century, the Ford Model T. For 19 years, the Model T wasn't just an automobile. It was an immortal god. At its absolute zenith, half of all cars rolling on the face of the earth were built by Ford. It held a market monopoly so ruthless, so deeply entrenched, it seemed impervious to gravity. So what machine, what force of engineering, possessed the absolute power and sheer cunning to assassinate a god? They didn't kill Ford by trying to build a cheaper car. Anyone with a basic understanding of economics knew that was a suicide mission. They killed him by targeting the most fragile element of the human psyche, pride. The executioner that toppled the throne didn't look like a rugged, loud, muddy tractor. It wore a tailored suit, it was highly polished, it smelled of fresh lacquer, and it carried a weapon that Henry Ford actively despised: elegance. That weapon was Chevrolet. Under the brilliant, cutthroat guidance of Alfred P. Sloan and William S. Knudsen, the mid-1920s Chevrolets, culminating in the absolute masterpiece that was the 1927 Chevrolet Series AA Capital, became the razor-sharp sword that pierced the heart of the Tin Lizzie empire. Forget dry statistics and spec sheets. This is not just a story of two machines. This is a blood-soaked corporate war of behavioral psychology, mechanical engineering, revenge, and the violent birth of modern consumerism that still manipulates your wallet today. Act 1. The Roar of the '20s. To comprehend the spectacular collapse of Ford, you have to understand the fever dream of America in the mid-1920s. The nation had just undergone a terrifyingly fast metamorphosis. Millions of miles of deeply rutted, muddy wagon trails, the very enemy that kept rural Americans isolated, had been paved over with smooth, endless asphalt. The country was exploding with the unprecedented wealth and unapologetic excess of the Roaring '20s. People no longer needed survival tools. They had survived. Now, they wanted to live. If the Model T was a pair of rugged, mud-caked rubber boots, durable, cheap, but ugly, the American public was now desperately shopping for polished dancing shoes. But inside the fortress of River Rouge, an industrial kingdom so vast it had its own private police force, Henry Ford violently refused to look outside the gates. He was surrounded by sycophants and yes-men. His own son, Edsel Ford, a man with a brilliant eye for aesthetics, begged his father to modernize the car. In response, Henry humiliated Edsel in front of executives and literally ordered a secret prototype his son had built to be smashed to pieces. Henry blindly, pathologically believed his loud, terrifying-to-drive, black Model T was the absolute pinnacle of human engineering. Just down the road, inside the headquarters of General Motors, an assassination plot was being meticulously drafted. It was spearheaded by two men who would rewrite history. The first was Alfred P. Sloan, the visionary president of GM, a cold intellect who believed in managing by data. The second was William S. Knudsen, known as Big Bill. Ironically, Knudsen was once Henry Ford's greatest production genius. He was the man who set up the very assembly lines that made Ford a billionaire. But because Knudsen dared to gently suggest the Model T was becoming obsolete, Ford unceremoniously fired him. Taking his intimate knowledge of Ford's fatal weaknesses, Knudsen carried his righteous fury to General Motors and took control of Chevrolet. Paired with Sloan's macro vision, They engineered the GM ladder of success. They tiered their brands: Chevrolet for the young buyer, Pontiac for the promotion, Oldsmobile, Buick, and finally Cadillac when you reach the apex of life. They realized a brutal, brilliant truth. Never try to sell the absolute cheapest car. Sell a car that costs just a little bit more, but makes the buyer feel like they belong to the upper class. The introduction of the Chevrolet Series K, V, and ultimately the 1927 Capital was the bomb dropped directly on Ford's stronghold. Act 2. The Elegant Blade. Sloan and Knudsen didn't try to build a machine as indestructible as a tank. They built a machine that felt like aristocracy. When a farmer or a clerk transitioned from a Model T to the driver's seat of a 1927 Chevy, the first thing that shocked their system was the control scheme. Remember, the Model T utilized 3 brain-melting pedals: high, low gear, reverse, transmission brake, and a hand throttle. Driving a Model T was a violent, sweaty wrestling match with physics. But Chevrolet, they equipped a standard 3-speed manual transmission with a conventional H pattern: left foot on the clutch, right foot managing the gas and brake, a smooth, gated shifter resting in your right hand. Suddenly, driving wasn't a desperate fight for survival. It became a refined, effortless art form. Under the hood sat an absolute mechanical marvel for the working class: the valve-in-head, inline-4 engine. While Ford stubbornly clung to the hot, suffocating, and inefficient side valve flathead, Chevy's overhead valve, OHV, architecture allowed the fuel mixture a much more direct, highly efficient path to the combustion chamber. It generated 26 horsepower. That sounds laughable by today's standards, but back then, it outmuscled the Model T, revved much smoother, ran quieter, and crucially, it utilized a proper water pump for cooling. Ford's Model T still relied on the terrifying thermosiphon method, literally relying on the heat of boiling water to circulate coolant, which routinely left owners engulfed in steam on steep hills. But the true kill shot, the weapon that captured the hearts of the public, was the exterior styling. General Motors had swallowed up Fisher Body, a legendary coach builder for the elite. Fisher gifted this affordable Chevy with the sweeping, graceful lines of expensive Cadillacs, a seamlessly integrated one-piece windshield, and elegant, crowned fenders. And the greatest magic trick of all, color. By partnering with the DuPont Chemical Company to invent quick-drying Duco lacquer, Chevrolet was no longer chained to Ford's miserable, fast-drying, utterly depressing Japan black. Now, housewives and bank tellers could walk into a dealership and order a car in royal blue, vibrant deep maroon, or striking emerald green. The car featured a cabin heater. It had an illuminated speedometer, and it came standard with an electric starter. The era of men suffering broken wrists and fractured ribs from violently hand-cranking a Ford was over. And if you're wondering how the working class could afford this luxury, GM unleashed a financial invention that altered the trajectory of the global economy: the General Motors Acceptance Corporation, or GMAC. For the first time in human history, you didn't have to suffer and save cash in a mattress for 5 years to buy an automobile. With a modest down payment and a trickle of installment payments each month, you could drive a gorgeous, multicolored Chevrolet right off the showroom floor. Chevrolet wasn't just selling metal. They packaged the American dream and sold it on a payment plan. In the blink of an eye, driving a Ford Model T was transformed from a point of pride into a glaring, public symbol of poverty. Act 3. The cost of luxury. But you must remember, every luxury exacts a brutal toll, and this elegant Chevrolet was by no means a flawless machine. If you threw both cars into a mud-soaked, apocalyptic survival contest, the Model T would still chew the Chevy up and spit out the scrap metal. That superior valve-in-head engine carried a vicious curse. It demanded obsessive, meticulous maintenance. The rocker arms sitting on top of the engine were initially completely exposed to the open air. Dust and road grit would fly directly into the moving joints. After a long drive, the owner had to pop the hood and use a manual squirt can to oil the felt pads on the valves. If you were lazy or forgot, the engine would begin to clatter furiously, like a broken sewing machine, and the metal components would eventually grind themselves to death. Adjusting the valve lash became a notorious, frustrating weekend ritual for gearheads of the era. And then there was that proud Fisher body. Unlike Ford's simple, rugged, all-steel construction, Chevrolet utilized a composite body, a skeletal frame made of ash and maple wood, nailed together and wrapped in a steel skin. When new, this made the ride incredibly quiet and insulated from vibration. But if the car lived in a damp climate, or if rainwater seeped past the window seals, the wooden skeleton would soak, swell, rot, and become a five-star banquet for termites. After 4 or 5 years, thousands of Chevys devolved into sagging, creaking ghost ships. Once the wood rotted away, the car would emit a terrifying death rattle over bumps, and occasionally, doors would literally fall off their hinges into the street. Not to mention, they still relied on rear-wheel mechanical drum brakes, making stopping a 40 miles per hour steel box an exhilarating game of Russian roulette. Did GM's buyers know this? Absolutely. Did they care? Not in the slightest. Americans were sick and tired of being bounced around until they were nauseous in agricultural implements. They gladly accepted the burden of constant oiling, managing electrical gremlins, and building garages to protect the wood from the rain. They willingly traded the invincibility of a tractor for the plush comfort of a true automobile. It was exactly these flaws that birthed the explosive aftermarket culture, with shade tree mechanics inventing aluminum valve covers and custom oiling systems just to keep those OHV engines alive. Act 4. The Law of the Apex Predator. The collapse was inevitable. In 1927, Chevrolet officially surpassed Ford in sales. The blow was so humiliating, so absolute, that Henry Ford was forced to bite his tongue and shut down the colossal River Rouge plant for nearly 18 months. He hemorrhaged market share, fired tens of thousands of men, and burned tens of millions of dollars, desperately trying to retool for the Model A to salvage his pride. But the fatal wound never healed. Ford had permanently lost his monopoly. The 1920s Chevrolet didn't just assassinate the Model T, it wrote the blueprint for the entire modern automotive industry. Look at how you interact with the automotive world today. You pick a car color to express your personality. You select premium trim packages and leather seats. You finance the vehicle through a bank. And every single year, the automaker releases a facelift with slightly new headlights and bumpers, designed specifically to make you feel like the car you bought last year is already outdated. A brilliant, ruthless corporate strategy known as planned obsolescence. None of that psychological manipulation came from Henry Ford. All of it was invented by Sloan, Knudsen, and these gorgeous, colorful Chevrolets. Today, these roaring 20s Chevys are some of the most fiercely protected treasures in the collector community. Owners pour thousands of hours into sanding, painting, and recreating every piece of ash wood. They don't preserve them because they are the fastest or the most reliable machines. They keep them alive because they were the first warriors brave enough to stand up to the most stubborn dictator in industrial history and rip the crown from his head. When you lean over the fender and hear that OHV engine clicking away, you aren't just hearing metal grinding on metal, you are hearing the literal sound of a revolution. This machine left the world with a blood-soaked lesson, a harsh law of nature that still terrifies trillion-dollar corporations today. No matter how great you are, no matter if you personally paved the roads for an entire era, the exact moment you stop listening to what people actually desire, there will always be someone else, wearing a sharper suit, waiting in the shadows to take your empire.